Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show 2.0. The show has been supported by you, the listeners, since 2016. We're from a very humble beginning with our first guest of the show, Surf Lifesaving Ironman champion Ali Day. We grew over essentially 8 to 9 years up to episode 377, and we are now at episode 378, and it gives me absolute pleasure to introduce you, the listenership, to Huw Darnell, accredited exercise physiologist, 10 years of experience in the industry. And probably about 2 years ago, I started to think about bringing the show into the next evolution. It's quite a lonely space, podcasting. You're responsible for everything. And I could see that if the show could align with someone that had the same passion and vision around helping athletes perform at their physical best, then we could open up a whole lot of extra content, extra value to you, the listeners. And honestly, inside the Australian borders and probably worldwide, I couldn't think of anyone more aligned to my own philosophies and values than Huw. So Huw, welcome to the show officially.
Thank you, Brad. Yeah, I'm absolutely pumped. Been a long time listener of the show, obviously a big fan of yourself. And I think it was around, COVID, around that time when things around the world were going a bit crazy. And I just was looking for this, direction to kind of guide my passion. And I'd had some success in the endurance sport space. I've been loving working with athletes. It's what drives me each day to get better as a clinician, and cheekily kind of lean into the content creation stuff as well. And I think I like to say we take ourselves seriously. We don't take ourselves seriously, but we take what we do serious.
Yeah.
And content is this creative outlet in quite a serious industry that allied health is, that we get to, show a side of ourselves, educate other people and have a bit of fun along the way. But we had some common interests. We had, Salty, an athlete of mine. I trusted Brad to kind of, help input there and get her to the point where she's, back in fine form and performing at her best. So it was like a synergy of a relationship, similar philosophies around how we treat athletes, the human side of being a clinician and leaning into developing really strong relationships with our clients. And that was something I really admired, the way you held yourself within the industry. And when the opportunity to come on the podcast came up, I was pumped and super excited to the direction we can take the show.
I think it's important to note this is not Huw just putting his hand up saying, I've got some time on the side to help with this project. Huw has invested in the show as a formal partner, and that's a sign of the platform that Huw sees this to be in terms of fulfilling our mission, which is to help you, the athlete, perform at your physical best. And I think a point of difference that we'd like to stay true to is that there can be lots of podcasts with lots of chatter, but we want to bring you quality content that helps you navigate injury. And as such, we're releasing or introducing, I should say, a new format of show, a new episode type called Huw?
Uncovering Injuries.
Yes, and so in these episodes, we'll be deep diving on specific endurance-based sporting injuries, and I'll be presenting the physiotherapy side. Huw will be presenting.
Brad's, such an expert in that acute stage to getting people back to performing, and my experience around the S&C kind of high-end performance stuff will be a great conduit from that continuum that is sports rehab and performance. And good rehab is good training, and good training equals good rehab. But some of the cases that we've had the chance to help, many people come through the clinic that we've able to assist athlete-wise, just give you insight into the protocols, the procedures, the things that are really helpful for overcoming some of these injuries.
So that'll be a really powerful new episode. In addition, we'll be still releasing our much-loved featured performer episodes, expert editions, interest editions in the occasional Coach's Corner. So plenty more to come. Episode 378, as per this episode. Thank you to the listenership once again. We've surpassed 4.5 million downloads, which is truly extraordinary in over, I believe, 50 to 60 countries. So thank you. Plenty more to come from the Physical Performance Show. And welcome once again, Huw Darnell. Huw Darnell, welcome to episode 379 of the Physical Performance Show. This is an expert edition, so we will explore some key topics around your line of work as an accredited exercise physiologist and strength and conditioning coach with expertise in the endurance sporting space population, runners, triathletes in particular, which is where our paths have so often crossed here in the domestic borders of Australia in collaborating with athletes such as Ellie Salthouse and others along the way. But Huw, what led you into pursuing exercise physiology in the first place?
I think like a lot of young Australians, sport obsessed growing up, but unfortunately had a few key injuries that changed my, trajectory along that pathway. A pretty significant shoulder injury that required a reconstruction surgery. And as a young kind of like 16-year-old at the time, experienced physio model that was very pain centric, like tunnel vision in on the injury itself. I did a really good job of overcoming the pain, but not a great job of getting me back to performing at a decent level. And so I kind of frame that now as like the old way of rehab. And it was something that kind of, I think, lit a fire within me to go down a pathway of not having other young athletes having to experience that same thing, of just people that are really well intentioned, but maybe kind of miss the mark on fully understanding what it takes to get an athlete back to performing at that top level. They were good at, dealing with the everyday Joe, but it kind of fell short of what I needed. And so it sent me on a path to, study exercise science, really, want to work with athletes at the top level. And so everything in those early years were just guided towards everything I could do to work in professional sport and work with elite level athletes.
And so it started with your own injury, a shoulder dislocation, instability episode? Yeah,
pretty significant. I hurt at surfing and then completely did it goalkeeping in soccer, kind of like typical behind the body, dislocation, rotator cuff, and then had to go under the knife, get it reconstructed.
And you were 16 at the time. Yep. So, that's a big rehabilitation process typically to return to sport at the levels you were AFL. Did you say AFL?
Goalkeeper.
Yep.
And then water polo and swimming were probably my main ones.
Yeah, okay. Goalkeeper for which code?
Soccer.
Soccer, yeah. So the round football. And you found there were the gaps in that return to sport progression with the providers at the time you're working with, who, as you just said, will no doubt working to the best of their ability, but things have certainly evolved, haven't they, in the rehabilitation space? And I think across the boundaries of exercise physiology, sports-based physiotherapy, there's that keen appreciation that it's not good enough to get someone out of pain. It's unless that's their goal, they need to go to the full gamut. So that drove your early interest. Were you aspiring to have a professional career in any of those sporting endeavours?
I probably realised early on, while I was a decent athlete across a lot of different codes, national level, I was never making an international team. I was acutely aware of that. That's probably why I diverted to water polo. The best swimmer on a water polo team is often, just a decent swimmer in the pool. So whilst I would have loved to have done that, I don't think that was a reality for me. So like maybe a lot of people in our industry, we do the next best thing and we help athletes try and achieve what we weren't able to.
Yeah. And you studied at UQ, is that right?
Correct. Yeah, I did an undergrad. Slight side note, like I did a year and a half of heavy biochemical science. I was going to become a chemical engineer. Maybe a little bit too much partying in that initial stage. Diverted to do a carpentry apprenticeship and then came back into sports science once I realised my passion really was around that athletic piece. Yeah. Exercise nutrition undergrad, and then did the Masters of Clinical Ex-Phys. And at that time, man, it was borderline obsession on like listening to podcasts. It was pretty limited in those days around just like stuff I could get from America, reading like T Nation, Eric Cressy, these guys from the US that were openly putting stuff out. And like I was, doing PD with guys like Keegan Smith early on who would do continuing education courses.
Yep.
And so I was just trying to stack as much info because uni kind of wasn't satisfying my need to want to learn more. And at that time I started, volunteering my time at Queensland Samoa Rugby. I was at UQ Sport Academy doing stuff with like Australian wheelchair rugby, some other really cool para sports, which was a good eye-opening experience, how to be really adaptable as a coach.
Yep.
Also UQ Swim Club, the UQ Boat Academy, which is rowing. And then we talk about athletes with interesting workload balances. Those guys rest days like 100K bike ride. So a good snapshot and experience across a lot of different codes there.
Yeah, wow. And then what spawned your interest in working with the endurance athlete, such as the running population and the triathletes in particular?
Yeah, really good question, mate. I was fortunate enough to work with the Brisbane Lions as an assistant strength and power coach. As you can appreciate, of all the football codes, they're probably the most like an endurance athlete, apart from the contact from 360 degrees. So I felt like the skills that I had built there and developing that athlete lent itself really well to triathlon and long distance triathlon, which I felt in the private space did a really poor job of S&C, especially at that point in time. And one of my childhood friends, Clayton Patel, was a pro Ironman back in the day, and I just reached out to him and said, "Hey, mate, would you be interested if I helped assist you and some of your athletes that you coach?" Yeah. Which he said yes to, and that was kind of like my original proving ground to say, does this AFL model of developing an endurance style athlete cross over to the sport of triathlon? Which it did really nicely. And the gains of someone who doesn't really expose themselves to S&C throughout their developing years was like super profound in terms of the gains that they would get. It's like newbie gains. When you haven't been in the gym before, you just adapt so quickly. Through that process, actually, one of my clients was a member of Carina League's Tri Club, where, Ellie Salthouse was a junior-old, and it was during COVID. She was at a training camp, actually, being home because she couldn't. The international race calendar was kind of pretty much toast at that point in time. And she just had what at that time was a potential career-ending hamstring reattachment surgery. And so she was considering, giving up the sport at that point. And I just said, look, come into the clinic, let's assess you and see if there's anything from a physical standpoint that we can assist with. Yeah, that was like 5 years ago now, and she's gone on to be winning the most 70.3 distance races of any female pro. So we managed to keep it going, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's great. And then Ellie will feature it in an upcoming feature before episode on the show, which we're looking forward to. But that's a tight, close relationship that I've seen from the sidelines up until the point where we co-assisted Salty or Ellie with her more recent knee injury. But I can see that the therapeutic alliance that you've built with Ellie, and it's rewarding to take an athlete through over the years, isn't it? From early days to successful, execution days as a professional. And then there's other triathletes of note that I've observed you working with as well. Ellie Hoyting. Yeah,
Ellie Hoyting, again, like an incredible athlete. All these athletes, before I come in contact with them, are obviously incredible in their own right. So by no means am I, trying to take credit for their success. But as you said, that therapeutic alliance of what can be a very lonely sport, endurance sport. There's a lot of time to get in your own head around things if they're not going the right way, or even when they're going the right way. And so I think having someone that is a consistent through that process, to be able to ask good questions, be a sounding board, objectively show their reality back to them when they can get in their own head around that process. And I've heard you speak to this before around the mental toll of injury, which I don't think people speak to enough. And asking really good questions to understand where their headspace is at, and then going on a journey of, discovery with them in terms of asking good questions, making them feel safe in an environment to, this is what they're comfortable doing. And it's quite a small circle when someone's injured, but then challenging them just outside of that or to the edges of that, and slowly over time, increasing their confidence, increasing their ability to trust the body again, which has been so cool. And to the point where you can modify their training. Like Ellie Hoiting, she broke her collarbone, got taken out in Spain in September of 23. We were able to kind of modify. She had it plated, had the surgery, had it everything. But April the next year, she became Oceania champion because we didn't stop the training. We viewed injury as an opportunity, and we were focusing on everything that she could do rather than what she couldn't do. And through that process, when she was able to get back to performing again, she hadn't really skipped a beat, and swimming was not a strong suit. It got to the point where the strength we were able to develop in the gym correlated to some good improvements in that discipline as well.
That's really nice. Injury can be an opportunity. And then the other thing I think there, Huw, that's just really interesting that you just shared is that psychological impact of injury on an athlete. And it's something I guess I recognised early in my professional work and from my own lived experience when as a 19-year-old triathlete that had aspirations to take it to a career, had a very nasty bike crash, subarachnoid brain hemorrhage, multiple fractures, and didn't realise at the time that I was probably an archetypal ADHD kid. I realise now in my 40s. But all of a sudden I had that identity taken away. I had that life substance of the dopamine that training used to give me taken away, and I just fell on a really flat time. And I was already in love with the idea of, if it wasn't triathlon, being physio. But it was that period that made me really realise, and even professionally, and like you just shared, that people don't come to see practitioners because they're in pain, not athletes. They come because it's having an impact on them as a total human being. And I think it's up to the astute practitioners to be able to acknowledge that, speak to that, and coach them through that. And it's more than just the skill of what's being done for the injury, right? It's actually being present, validating thoughts, course correcting ideas. What would you say, Huw, are your 3 top tips to help the psychology of the injured athlete?
Yeah, great question. And I'd love to hear what your 3 top tips for this are as well. After I kind of share what I feel like is where I kind of base my kind of rehab model around. But for me, it starts with I like to spend an hour with an athlete initially, minimum, and most of that time is spent talking, so I can really understand where they're coming from, because everyone comes with a story, whether that's correct or incorrect. That's what they believe to be true in their own mind. And so if I can't meet them where that story is currently, I've got no hope of developing rapport with them trusting what I'm about to ask them to do to try and help. Like that top tip, number 1, is just develop a really robust subjective assessment process where it is just conversational, getting to know the person, getting to know their beliefs, their fears around what's going on. It starts with that. And number 2, it's then asking really good questions back to them. So what I feel like I've understood is actually what they are trying to say, because I think sometimes in our attempt to understand them, we're too quick to jump to the gun. And so, just relaying back, I'm hearing you say this. Is that what you're saying? Because then that gives them an opportunity to feel heard. Plus then, if it isn't correct, then get them, us on the same page. And then number 3 is just setting really clear expectations around, okay, you're here. This is what you're struggling with. This is what we need to try and get back to. This is the plan. And being very upfront around if there's things I don't know, like showing my vulnerability as a practitioner and going, look, I don't know. At my best guess, this is it, but let's reach out to people like yourself or reach out to other people who do have those answers that I don't currently. And I feel like when you do that with an athlete, it kind of addresses those concerns, and it makes for the objective stuff to be so much more powerful.
That's good. So the first one there is taking a good history, getting to know the athlete. 2, asking good questions, and then 3, group thinking if there's something that's outside the wheelhouse, which I certainly appreciate the power of that 19 years into a physiotherapy career. Is I feel like the longer I've gone on, the more I realise there's gaps, and there's gaps that people can fill. And the athlete doesn't take an issue if you don't have every gap filled, but you can extend a whole level of assistance, and it actually probably adds to the alliance if you can actually pull the right people in at the right time. So would that be a fair summary of your 3 top tips to help the psychology of an injured athlete?
Yes, definitely, mate.
Yeah, brilliant.
Mate, could you add what's your number 4 if you have anything in that space?
I think the questions are hugely important. I've sort of coached many physios over the year that if in your initial intake, your patient's not in tears, maybe you've missed the mark. And so I often say it's about 3 questions down. So don't settle with they're here for the consultation because they've got a sore shoulder. Question, I think the 2 most powerful questions for any athlete that's injured is, what's your greatest concern? Like in your heart of hearts, I'll literally say that word for word. In your heart of hearts, Huw, what is your greatest concern about your sore shoulder? And I sit back, close my mouth and let them talk, and often the tears come. And then I like to also just, why is that important to you? So if Huw, you said your shoulder's sore, you're worried because you've got an upcoming event in 6 months and it's, your A race for the year, I might then ask you, okay, I understand you. Why is that race so important to you? And I often share the example of the mum that I was helping with a running related injury. And I asked her, in your heart of hearts, what's the greatest concern? And she said, well, we lost our teenage daughter to cancer a year or 2 earlier. And I'd told her that I'd run this race in her memory before she passed away. And I'm like, okay, that's very different to having a sore IT band or whatever was going on. So that's the level of connection, I think, that makes the difference between the really effective practitioners and the ones that are just floating out on the surface. So that's probably all I revalidate from what you shared, Huw. In terms of the endurance athlete, I find if people jump over to your Instagram handle, which is
Huw Darnell. Yeah, that's the name.
HUW
DARNELL.
NELL. They'll see a whole lot of content around strength and conditioning. I've found over the years in working with endurance athletes, some of the limiting beliefs are starting to fall down. I think there's a more ready acceptance that strength and conditioning can help the endurance athlete. What would you see as the 3 biggest barriers to the endurance athlete engaging with strength and conditioning? The 3 biggest barriers.
Yeah, great question, man. This is probably, like you said, people public facing within the sport are now doing strength and conditioning, so it's a little more widely accepted. But you don't need to wind back that far when it wasn't, and that probably people just trained the 3 disciplines, and that was what they were doing. But I would say the biggest barrier is one, like I don't want to put on too much muscle, which potentially, if you've been burnt by experiences in the past, you've seen an S&C coach who's worked in the rugby codes, and you get buried by a rugby strength and conditioning program, high hypertrophy. Yeah, I think that would be a very real concern, but I've been trying to get big for 20 years. It still hasn't happened. So, so that'd be number 1, definitely. The soreness associated with it.
Yeah.
And again, I think when you smartly design a strength training program with progressive overload in mind, and again, I mentioned a subjective assessment to see where someone is psychologically, but a really robust physical assessment to see where someone is physically is also so important, because I can have the best program in the world, but if someone can't execute it well, or it's meeting them much further down the journey than they're able to execute on, you're going to have debilitating muscle soreness. Yeah. And that's the best way to put someone off wanting to do that. I had a male pro that I was helping out recently, and he shared the story of early days in AFL. S&C helped him, and he couldn't walk for a week afterwards. Yeah. And so now he was very hesitant in starting S&C work again, because that was his experience. Yeah. And then number 3 is probably a fear of being injured in the gym. Yeah. Yeah. Just, it's weights, it's strength. It's a scary thing if you've never had experience of it in the past. Yeah. That's where I say it's not strength training, it's performance programming. Yeah. And there's a very big difference between the two, because if you're getting stronger, and the adaptations that we actually want to see from an S&C program for endurance sport that have been shown in the science to shift performance in a positive nature are very different for sports. And within the sport, the endurance sport space, it's not stuff that should leave you cripplingly sore or have a high risk of injury when it's done correctly and smartly programmed. Working backwards there to reiterate, the fear of injury in the gym can hold athletes back as a barrier. Muscle soreness, which can absolutely be the result of engaging with some strength and conditioning at times. And the first one was the misconception that an endurance athlete will bulk up
And each of those have been more or less counted in expert editions over the years on the show. Richard Blagrove spoke about the interference effect with the endurance athlete and the strength training athlete. You know, at a biochemical signaling level, they basically cancel each other out. The risk of injury, I often say to an athlete, you're at more risk of an injury if we don't now engage with some appropriate progressive work here than if you stay away from fear of getting injured in a gym.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the muscle soreness, it brought to mind, Huw, an example of dual world champion athlete in the professional triathlon space, an Olympic medalist, and this athlete had gone into his third decade and was rehabilitating some calf muscle strain injuries, recurring. And I'd programmed to assist with that, and the athlete got a little bit nervous about how his legs would feel tired taking him into some key training days. And so at that point, stopped engaging with that program. And unfortunately, the injury recurred in the absence of what was needed, which was restoring capacity to that affected tissue. And probably cost in some way the injury that he had, potential another Olympics for him. And so that's a real example of, even at the top level in endurance sports, these barriers have to be strategically overcome. And I reflected on that and thought, could have I done a better job in my programming? Could have I reaffirmed expectations that, hey, look, you might get sore for a period of time, but we'll work through that. And then, of course, often, we're fitting in amongst the coaching team, which that comes back to communication, doesn't it? Which can be a barrier. So what, on the communication side, or an obstacle of sorts, or an opportunity, any key tips that you would deploy to the athlete in terms of how to communicate with their team to get the best out of the process of strength and conditioning? And then conversely, key tips that practitioners should think about in trying to communicate with stakeholders?
Yeah, again, such a great question, and something you will struggle with if the coach has maybe a bit more of an old school mentality and a bit more closed-minded. Because at the end of the day, an athlete has a big trust relationship with their coach, and if they don't value it and they don't want their athlete doing it, you're probably going to have a pretty hard time in reality. If the pain point gets big enough that they seek guidance and advice from you, that's when you often can have the in terms of that they now have a need for it that they're seeking external advice on. The best ways that I have seen is just coming back to what the evidence says, and then if you have experience in the space and you have examples of times that it has worked really well, and you can kind of meet them where they're at. If they have these concerns, again, having that conversation like, yeah, I don't want to be sore for my key threshold session of the week, or I have key runs here and here. Like, that's where we have to be really adaptive around different ways that we can implement it. I think being adaptable in the programming is a really good, argument or counter argument to, we can't fit in, we don't want to be too sore, or we don't have enough time. So I think having like a counter argument to the common, reasons why someone wouldn't engage, just to not argue with them, but kind of, tell them how we can make this work. Yeah. And then liaising, having some like key bits of information around, what does the research say? And then you can show this to coaches, having like if one athlete buys in, using them as an example back to their team or their club. For example, I work with a heap of clubs, but one athlete might come along. We do the Volt testing suite. We look at a lot of their objective markers around where they should be and show them the normative data. Mm-hmm. And when we can draw this gap between what is expected and where they are, and then we go back to the club and we chat to the coaches, CC them in on the testing data, and be like, look, so-and-so's come with an Achilles tendinopathy. If it's an injury, and like they've tested at this max strength on the max ISO ankle push, their 5RM calf strength is here. We've got these key variables around stuff that we know that is validated, and we can draw that gap between where they are. We can use that example, and the coach usually lead with a fair bit of, they're inquisitive, they like numbers. And so if we can come back with concrete examples of how this could help them and their team, I find that to be a really helpful tool for me developing relationships. So as an allied health practitioner, that could be really cool. And the athlete as well, if they have got an assessment or they have these counter arguments to the common reasons for not doing it. That seems to be where I've had success in the space.
So objective data, using objective data to show progress, to also highlight any deficits in or impairments that may exist. I resonate with that in my field, Huw. If you can't objectify it, then you're probably losing some effectiveness in the intervention being taken up and taken full course. And you talk about that gap between getting someone out of pain and then getting back to true performance. That part is just so dependent on having markers that they can see. And I mean, we're in an age of things being able to be measured, right? Like, this is an era where relatively inexpensively you can have equipment in a clinic setting or in a strength and conditioning setting. So there's really no excuses to not be using data of sorts now. Would you agree with that?
I'm a big fan of the Volt kit, and the buy-in you get from an athlete to show them initially in that initial assessment, but also on the catch-up, like for a process where they may not feel that different, be like, hey, look, you're 30% stronger on a few tests, nice green on the charts. Like, the buy-in for your athlete is massive.
Yeah.
It's such a cool toy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a difficult question. I was asked it recently in doing some work for Polar. It's a really difficult one because there's no context to it, but it's a fun one. What would you say, if you could only ever give the endurance athlete for the rest of your career 3 conditioning exercises? Obviously, you understand the challenge of this question. What would those 3 be and why?
Are we going triathlon here or running? What's the...
Let's go triathlon, make it specific.
Okay. It's like picking your favourite children here. It's impossible.
It's lacking context, but, I often give myself that acid test and think, if I could only give one message to the population, what would it be?
I appreciate the test. I'm going to pick one for the upper body, just because we don't know if they're ITU or long course. And so if we want some pull power in the water, I think a version of a pull-up is going to be important.
On that, what's the best you've ever seen an endurance athlete knock out? Leaving Kane Eckstein with a pull-up world record aside.
In terms of reps or plus body weight?
Yeah, the reps, just body weight.
They probably would have, I think them plus 20 kilos for 3 reps.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, for an endurance athlete.
Yep. How many did you knock out before we started filming this?
Was it up to 100 or was it?
I just stopped you over here at the pull-up bar. But so the pull-ups for upper body?
Yeah, pull-up for upper body.
Makes sense.
For lower body, I'd like to have one exercise for just high central nervous system drive. Mm-hmm. So I'd have a trap bar deadlift because it's so modifiable around athletes' anthropometrics, like limb lengths. You're not constricted by a conventional barbell.
Yep.
And then because I've gone a hinge pattern in the lower body for the central nervous system driven exercise, I'm going to go a barbell step up, but in kind of like a low, I call it critical sporting maneuver, like that A position for a runner is so key on the hip lock and being able to maintain a stable pelvis under heavy load. That barbell step up, trap bar deadlift, and a pull up would be the ones that I'd lean on.
And for benchmarks, I mean, once again, there's no context, so it's a very difficult, almost impossible question to answer. But just in terms of sharing some of your knowledge with the listeners, a step up, what might be an aspirational resistance target to hit with a step up? Obviously, it depends on height. I get it, but
as a general kind of way I like to execute that, it's 3 20-kilo bumper plates stacked on top of one another. I don't like the soft boxes because then you're adding inherent instability to the drill. So it'd be around 12 inches. And then, as you can appreciate, because we've dropped the range a little bit, we then want to go higher on load. And so again, we're trying to tap into that central nervous system drive on the exercise. And so I think if you can hit body weight for 5 reps per leg, that's a pretty good standard to be able to hit.
Yeah, wow. And the trap bar deadlifts?
Trap bar dead, there's stages to this. As a first hurdle we want to overcome, it's like a 3 reps with body weight. And then we want to be able to hit 1.5 times body weight. I think as an endurance athlete, once I push people much beyond that. I find the compressive nature of the exercise starts to make them lose some athleticism around rotation in their midsection, because it is quite restrictive on their ribs and their spine.
Yeah.
So 1.5 times body weight. Beyond that, it's probably redundant in terms of the extra drive you get and the benefits you see from it.
That opens up a question that I feel like clinically it's a moving target. Depends. It always depends on who you're working with and their backstory and what they're dealing with and where they're going with their goal in terms of their goals. But that balance between movement correction being excessive and movement correction being in terms of how someone moves, say in a lifting sense, let's take a squat, for example. You would have seen it. I've seen it over the years. People have low confidence in executing the task because they're overthinking, am I squatting right? And sometimes I'm like, just do it. And they'll tell you if there's anything that's obvious. Like, how do you, as a health professional working with athletes day in, day out, who are moving resistance, how do you strike that balance, and how do you process the over-cueing that you sometimes see in the social media space, and then the lack of cueing that you might find is important for other people? Where's the balance lie?
Man, it's funny, even you asking that question is probably the journey I went on as a coach myself of over-cueing when you're trying to deliver so much value as a young coach, but you realise you overburden people with too many things to think about. I find, as a general rule of thumb, the more complex a movement pattern becomes, the less internal focus we can have. And this has kind of been shown in the research as well. You want to externalize the cueing to make a complex movement pattern, because there's so many joints at play that if you think about one thing, you're going to lose focus on multiple other things. And so to put that into context on the squat, which you asked about, because there is, it's a multi-joint movement, it's compound, there's pretty much no part of the body that's not being under load in this. If I say squeeze your glutes, you're going to think about just this hip component of the drill, and you're going to lose the knee and the foot. Squeezing the glutes versus focusing on the floor. And I want you to imagine the foot tripod. Once they've got that cue, it's like, and now push the earth away. And so that externally focused cue of driving the floor often will stack a lot of things to create the outcome we want, versus that internalized cueing, which we see, early stage rehab is so important. The more complex a movement becomes, the more it detracts from overall performance.
So that external cueing, push the floor away with your feet, those cues that you see it, don't you, when you work with the athlete, it just clicks. And I find, this is my experience, the more simple it is, the more cut through you probably get.
Definitely. And I think if we use the squatting as an example, but the reason for a lot of accessory drills is to create what someone once termed sensory equity, which I thought was such a cool way of conceptualizing. We do a dead bug on the floor, not because it's core strength and drill, it's to create positional awareness around what it means to create a neutral spine and maintain it as we start to move. So if I can do it in a closed chain environment and, talk about the abs as Lego blocks, and you think about them connecting together and not busting apart. Now when you're in a squat and I say Lego, you're like, oh, I know what he means. But it's one term, one cue that we've created awareness around through the process of training and accessories or warm-up drills or activations. But now it goes into the complex movement pattern that we actually want to see change on. That's why variety of movement in a program is so valuable. Not for the variety's sake, but for the building the ability to execute on a skill in lots of different scenarios.
Yeah, that skill word. I was at an Edna King hip rehabilitation 2-day course on the Gold Coast last year. Edna, lead physiotherapist.
Such a great coach.
Aspetar. And Huw, I had a bit of a reawakening moment where I think you mentioned that as a clinician, professionally, you go through evolutions. I'd almost forgotten that running was a skill, not cerebrally, because I know that, but clinically. And Edna at the workshop was like, in his brilliant, I think it's Irish accent, was like, runners don't get better running. They might get fitter running more. They get fitter running more, but they're not becoming better technical runners running more. So in his brilliant accent, we need to find ways to make them feel, I think he used the words, stupid, not in a condescending way, but while they train, make them feel really uncomfortable because that's challenging their neural system. And it was a real eye-opener for me. I came up through an era of running as a junior where we'd do drills all the time, and it was drills and you'd feel silly doing them. And I was like, oh gosh, I've got to bring that back in my clinical practice. So I love what you just said about the skill side of it. There's skills that you're not going to get just through going out and logging more hours on Strava with swim, bike or run.
Yeah, such an important point. And the skill of running, especially when you're returning to running, because you've been away from the skill from so long, is such an important thing to recalibrate. Like you said, I think a lot of people treat running as just conditioning. There's no skill element to it. Yep. But there's guys out there now who I feel like are doing a pretty good job of singing the running is a skill message and giving it the attention it deserves.
Yeah, totally. I know one of the upcoming guests, the balance runner, will feature, and that'll be a good deep dive at that point. Digging into that content for sure.
And I think you spent like making them feel stupid, and then making them feel stupid is
we could replace that with silly. Yeah. I was using Edna's term there.
But I think and like in essence, what you're saying is create contrast between not being able to do something, figure it out, and so then you can do it rather than, hey, squeeze your glutes. Because now it's like if you had a multi-choice exam and I just kept giving you the answers, you might get a fantastic short-term outcome, but no true learning has actually occurred.
Yeah.
And so contrast, and Paul talks about this is like old way, new way, way, new way. He doesn't give them the answer. He goes, what do you feel? How does it change? And he goes, okay, so then they almost give him the cues that they're going to use because they're like, oh, I felt lighter here. He goes, all right, lighter's your cue now.
Yeah, wow. Powerful. One of the biggest barriers, pushbacks to strength and conditioning, if I had to pick one, it wouldn't be a lack of appreciation for what it can do. I think a lot of people have jumped over that bridge of knowing that it can help their performance, and we won't go into all the science of that. There's prior expert editions on that, and there's new papers, etc. But I think most people appreciate that strength and conditioning will help their performance. But one of the big barriers is fitting it in. If we're talking about the endurance athlete, if they're not full-time professional like some of your clients and some of mine, and even then, it can be a challenge fitting into their schedule. What would you say to the working athlete that knows they should be doing some strength and conditioning, but they just feel like they're so time poor?
Which is pretty much all the age groupers, right? They're working, they're family members, and they're an athlete. All right, start from gold standard, and then we, again, just move it back to a level that they agree that they can execute on. Pre-season, like the maximum we'd ever get someone doing is like 3 days of gym sessions. If like there's no way I can do that, it's like, can you do 2? I can't do 2, but I can sneak it in around my sessions across the week. The term is microdosing strength, and so we want to think of these small opportunities, either pre or post session, that we can start to use warm-ups as stacking skills. Stacking strength. If it's a key session that we're worried about an injury, potentially after that session, we do mini doses of strength. And so I found that to be a really effective way. And then when time does allow for it, maybe it's in the pre-season, off season if they ever have one, then they can go for the longer, 30 to 60 minute sessions in the gym. But something's better than nothing. It's really about, if you're able to think about the movements that aren't going to leave you sore, they're low equipment, you can get done quickly in little 10 to 15 minute bouts. That's like a really good way. We just increase the frequency across the week.
Yeah, that's powerful. I had Joel Filiol, who to date is the most winningest coach in triathlon history, former guest of the show. And I've had the pleasure of collaborating with Joel on a few of his athletes over the years. He is so... he's got such a deep appreciation for that minimal effective dose approach. What's the minimal effective dose for this athlete that will get the outcome without being excessive? And I often think of that in what I do clinically, and it's exactly as you just shared. And Richard Willey, speaks about, distributed model through the week. Even in rehabilitation sense, you will have an endurance athlete say, look, I just can't get to a gym twice a week. And so it might be like, well, let's go for once and let's use the power of, say, some plyometric work through the week. It's something I sort of picked up from Rich as well. There's always a way, but I think it comes back to that former point of communication. And I think that's it. Sometimes an error of younger career professionals is they try and make what they think the athlete needs fit versus the other way. What can fit on your schedule, and how do we come to a workable? Do you find that's fair, like a fair assessment in terms of getting buy-in? It's got to be doable, or it's just a turn off.
It's 100%, mate.
It's pointless.
It's a 10 out of 10 that they feel like they can commit to the program. Otherwise, you can have the most bespoke, individualized, best program on paper, but if they can't do it, it means nothing.
Yeah, and I just, from it's a waste of everyone's time. Like, something is better than nothing.
Agreed.
Whatever, while you're making coffee, whatever, it's something, and it's just then up to the practitioner to be skilled enough to give them something that's meaningful, right?
Definitely. And even just throughout the season as well, mate, like the amount that it takes to maintain a quality versus build it is also something. But I think we're hammering the point here, but it's get some strength work in as an endurance athlete, so you don't have to face an unnecessary injury that you could have been using this to build your capacity so you can tolerate the training loads that are on the body.
Yeah, brilliant. Huw, final question before we do our closing 2-set questions. You mentioned through a season, when you're programming athletes, an endurance athlete who will typically have their racing season, their off season, their pre-season, how do you sort of, in broad terms, periodize their strength and conditioning? That's something clinically I've been challenged with, is where's this, obviously I'm often rehabilitating set injuries, but then where does that and how does that periodization look for an endurance athlete?
Again, great question, and something that I've, I think, changed my mind on. And you make some mistakes in your journey as a clinician along the way. But pre-season, the longer we get away from key races, I think that's the time to get the work done. And if you are going to have a bit of soreness, that's probably when you're in more of a base building zone or training block, that's going to be where we do a bit more gym volume and maybe introduce some new movements, bigger ranges of motion, higher volumes. As we get closer to in season, we are going to get to a point where the redundancy of adding more training, it's just never worth it. And at the end of the day, they're athletes. Swim, bike, run is what they do. The gym is not what they do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so it shifts from what it takes to build a central nervous system adaptation, tissue tolerance adaptation, is not the same thing that it takes to maintain a quality. And so when we go more to in-season, we're reducing the time within the gym, which inherently will reduce the amount of exercises they're doing. And I really love isometrics, like high yielding, high intensity isometrics, for a number of reasons. The toll on the central nervous system is so much lower. The associated muscle soreness they're going to get with that's lower. So again, from a buy-in point of view, they can be doing, like I said before, that kind of max ankle iso push to get some good resilience around that full run kinetic chain. And you can do that and not be that sore from it. But the load on the Achilles tendon and calf is at such a high level that we're going to maintain that adaptation that we're building in the off season. And then keeping the intensity relatively high, doing some power work, but then just reducing the volume of their key lifts. And they're not having much accessory work that's probably going to leave a bit more fatigue as they're kind of within race blocks or got key races. And then a month out from a race starting to deload a bit, and 2 weeks out, it's kind of very light, if anything at all.
And I guess that brings up this sort of an add-on part to that question, is tapering around the strength and conditioning process for these key endurance races. Briefly, what have been, obviously it comes back to the athlete, but any sort of key tips you'd share to the listener around how to taper their strength and conditioning efforts leading into key races?
If they have data on this, super powerful, because they can kind of see how long it takes for a taper for them to freshen up. So then it can be very individualized. In the absence of that, I generally say 2 weeks out from a race that all the work should have been done. We're not going to get any adaptation in that time point. Week of race, no strength at all. Really, it's just dynamic mobility. If they like plyos, just to keep things sharp and fresh, and some activation work. That's what I like week of the race. 2 weeks out, sometimes athletes, nothing then either. It's just very similar to race week. For the ones who freshen up or they've been in the sport longer, they've been lifting for many years, they might like to just have a small little 10, 15 minute session within the gym. Again, not a lot of volume, just get the central nervous system firing. That 3 to 4 week window, they'd probably be at about 50% of their typical gym volume. and then 4+, and they can kind of, depending on what training block they're in.
In a prior expert edition, we featured Inigo Mujica, who's arguably the world's leading tapering expert. And I remember Inigo saying their literature through their systematic review had found a 2-week taper for strength and conditioning to be about the mark. So that's interesting. And I just had to laugh there, Huw, when you mentioned about the power of plyos being a stimulus ahead of a race. And I had the world champion Ironman going in to defend his title at Kona, and I had him doing some plyos, and he was using some Hoka running shoe boxes, and happened to roll his ankle on one of the boxes and sent me a message. And it was a message I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, that's not what we want. So you've got to be careful with what you use then for your plyometric, your obstacles, right? Huw, every guest of the show, and we'll be exploring a whole lot more of your knowledge, and we'll overlay that with the sports physiotherapist perspective on the new episodes that we release, which we've titled,
Uncovering Injuries.
Uncovering Injuries, which will be a fun listener-focused series of episodes over time that just explore key endurance injuries, where we get to share the strength and conditioning perspective, the injury rehabilitation journey from an accredited exercise physiologist and a sports physio. So that'll be fun. So we'll be tapping in a whole lot more to your knowledge as we go forwards. But every guest of the show, and you're in the hot seat today, gets asked 2 set questions. And the first is, if you could boil everything you've learnt through your extensive career to date, working with some of the best athletes, endurance sports around, recreational athletes, the whole gamut, into one piece of advice to help that athlete perform at their physical best, Huw Darnell, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think this is a cheater's way of encapsulating a few pieces of advice into the one piece of advice. But you need to pay appreciation to the 4 pillars of performance and do your best to optimize each. And that's movement, recovery, mindset, and nutrition. And when you've got those 4 pillars, you can build the foundations of some epic performance on top of that.
So just those again: movement, recovery, mindset, nutrition. The 4 pillars of performance. The 4 pillars of performance. That was a cheeky answer, but we'll give it to you. Still within the guardrails of the question. Well done, Huw. And Huw, every guest of the show for the library of 378 episodes prior to this one has issued listeners with a physical challenge for the week. So what is Huw Darnell's physical challenge going to be to listeners?
I'm massive on barefoot training, but not barefoot. I'm not saying go out and just run barefoot. There was a paper recently that was released by Triathlon Australia, I believe, around time lost to injury and what the most prevalent injuries were. And they were lower shank injuries. Touch wood, most of my athletes don't get foot injuries, and I pay that down to a number of factors, but one of them being we do all our lower body strength sessions without shoes on. All their run warm-ups are done without shoes on. So plyos, dynamic movement prep, activation drills. And so my challenge to the listener is, for your warm-ups for the next month, and for your lower body strength, unless injury pending, get the shoes off, get the feet to operate like feet. There's 33 bones, 26 joints, 10,000 nerve endings. And the rise of the super shoe and these cycling cleats and swimming don't provide a stimulus to a really dynamic piece of anatomy, physiology that Da Vinci said is a masterpiece of engineering and design. And so shoes off, if the gym doesn't allow it, some minimalist barefoot style shoes, such an important way to develop that intrinsic nature of foot strength. And it's the foundation to produce the force for the rest of the body.
So powerful. Just yesterday I was in Sydney for an exam for my specialisation process for sports physio, and one of our country's best specialist sports physios was literally talking to a couple of us around, if you ignore the feet, for a lower limb injury, it's at your own peril. So it's just so topical. And then we've just featured Sue Mays, former head of the Australian Ballet Health Department for 30 years. So that's a worthwhile expert addition to loop back to.
That was fantastic. Yeah. The blend of 30 years of experience dealing with a population that have a lot of foot injuries.
That's elite, yeah. So I think it's all there. So ignore the feet at our own peril. And I'm taking that on board with my work as well. Huw Darnell, we've finally got here to feature you, and thank you for sharing just some of your years of experience condensed into a few key takeaways there. I'm sure the listener will find it helpful, and look forward to hosting these upcoming episodes together with the Physical Performance Show 2.0. We've got a whole lot of fun and exciting things coming up, which we'll be releasing progressively. The first being some limited edition merch drop, which will happen soon. But for the listener that wants to jump along and follow, your online content is excellent. It's educational. It's humorous. It's entertaining, I should say, as well at times. Where can they find you?
Instagram's probably the best platform, and that's just Huw Darnell, my name.
HUWDARNELL.
Yeah,
yep.
As you said, I like to have a bit of a laugh on there, but deliver some good education around the things that we see day to day in the clinic and try to educate people along the way.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Huw.
So there you have it, episode 368 of the Physical Performance Show in the books, and this is the start of the Physical Performance Show 2.0 with co-host Huw Darnell. Now, I trust and I know you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please reach out and follow Huw. You'll find Huw over at Huw Darnell, HUWDARNELL. And of course, follow the show as well if you're yet to do so at Physical Performance Show over on Instagram. You can follow us over at YouTube also. And if you, as an endurance athlete or someone looking to perform at your physical best, are stuck with a niggling, persistent pain or injury, you can jump over to Pogo Physio's telehealth consultations at pogophysio.com.au, or jump over to Huw's Instagram or online over at huwdarnell.com. Massive thanks to the team who make this show possible: Daryl Misson, audio engineer; Susan Wilkin, show administration; Kalia, videography; and Matthew Olding, show graphic design. Now, coming up, you are in for some real treats on the Physical Performance Show. Next week, we'll bring you an expert edition featuring Dr. Jen Hamer. It's a critical conversation delving into the role that coaches play in managing the risks of low energy availability amongst athletes. It's an expert edition any endurance athlete or stakeholder in sport will benefit from. So until next week, keep pursuing your physical best performance. This has been Brad Beer and Huw Darnell on the Physical Performance Show.